right. Great. Looks like we are live. Thank you, everybody, for joining. Oh, I should leave that open. Thank you, everybody, for joining another episode of the OpenJS Foundation's Cross-Project Council meeting. Today is the 13th of October. And yeah, thanks for joining. Don't forget, folks who are in the meeting, to drop your name and such, your handle into the meeting minutes. And also, you know, everybody likes a note taker. So please help out there. Thank you. So getting things started, do we have any announcements?
We have several things that we just want to make sure folks are aware of so they can follow along and get involved and tune in and that sort of thing. Today is AMP Fest. Happy AMP Fest to Ampers out there. And they kicked off that content this morning, but you know, that's going to be available all day and onward on YouTube. So go check it out if you're at all interested. And also, the AMP TSC is going to be doing an AMA with us. Ask Me Anything with the AMP TSC team. That's tomorrow after, let's see, is that noon Eastern? I think it's noon Eastern. And so if you have questions or you want to tune in live for that, you can do that on our OpenJS Foundation channel. And we'll be tweeting about that as well. In the next week or so, we've got a couple of different working meetings that I think y'all may enjoy. One is the marketing committee is going to be meeting next Tuesday. We'd love to get more of our community participants involved in those conversations. So please dial in. It's on our public calendar if you're interested. We also have the standards working group meeting next week. We're going to be talking about sort of 2021 strategy because thank God this year's going to be over very soon, everyone. And so we're going to be thinking about next year and getting very excited together on that. So join us for that conversation if you would like. And we have lots of kind of boot up activities happening around the OpenJS world for 2021, which is another thing that we're looking forward to and would love to have more community interest in organizing. If you're at all interested in the programming committee work, do reach out to us. I think that's the bulk of it, unless I'm missing something, which I usually am.
All right.
But I'm not being corrected, so this is great.
Yep. Yep. I was waiting for that as well. Good. Thank you, Jory. Thanks for all that. Cool. And good luck to AMP today. I hope everything goes well. Cool. So we can probably run through the agenda pretty quickly. As I mentioned before we started the stream, we'll go through the agenda, hopefully have a good chunk of time to work on some stuff in the second half of the meeting. We agreed last week to talk about the staging proposal process, which I look forward to getting into. So jumping into the agenda, the first item on here is pull request 659. This is add ICLA only option to IP policy guidance. We've already got a few approvals on this and it's been open for a week. So I think we can probably land this. I was going to land it earlier, but I figured we'd touch on it in the meeting so that people were aware. But unless anyone has any objections, I say we squash and merge. Going once. Beauty. I'm on it. Great, that is happening and is merged. Thank you, Toby. So that knocks that one out. Growth plan template. is issue 658. Toby opened this a week ago. I think this is just generally an issue to kind of track the work on that. Is that accurate? Looking at the comments.
I believe that's accurate.
Yeah, I can't remember why exactly we did that, but
I think we had it like, because the last comment was we decided to do work sessions in the CPC meeting, which we did do last week, I think.
mm-hmm.
So this might have been on the agenda to remind us to do that in work session.
Okay. Okay. Isn't there a growth plan template already in process, like a PR open somewhere? Am I crazy?
Yep. This was open 28 days ago, so it may have been prior to that, because Toby has opened one and we were discussing that template, and we did talk about it. It's either last week or the week before a fair amount.
Okay. Okay. Great. So I guess we'll consider this as something we can work on in an upcoming CPC meeting. That kind of a plan. All right. Cool. I'm moving on. Unless anybody has anything else there. The next item here is pull request 650. This is the proposal to remove the growth stage. This is a draft. This is something that we've been kind of talking about in terms of, this is sort of born out of the review process that has been a conversation in a variety of angles over the last couple months, I guess. So there's some commentary here over the last couple weeks. Toby's not here, but I know, Michael, you commented. Are you familiar? Do you want to update folks on what we have here?
Well, I just commented here that I think my recollection is that when we were discussing the growth plan and you know, we had Chris in one of the meetings, was that we agreed the next step was to build out a couple of those plans, look at what they look like, and then use that to decide whether, yeah, it makes sense to have a separate growth stage or not. And so that's kind of my remembrance of the next step, was to build out. I think, you know, Toby was going to create one for AMP and Chris was going to work on one for Mocha, and then we were going to look at those to kind of inform this kind of PR and the other work around that area.
Yeah, this is officially pulling out the growth stage as a project stage, right? I mean,
right.
It is adding the growth plan bits, but is also removing the whole section of a growth stage. Yeah.
Yeah, like, you know, we'd had that discussion of should it be a separate stage, or should you just be able to be an impact or at large project who can have a growth plan?
Yep. Yep.
And as I remembered, it was like, well, let's look at what one of those plans looks like, and then we can figure out if that makes, you know, it makes sense to have a stage or it makes sense not to have a stage.
Yeah. Yeah. I appreciate this work getting kicked off. It makes sense to me. I'm going to dig into the PR details today, and I'll add any comments. I encourage everyone else to do the same. Does anybody have any comments or thoughts they want to add to this? Get Dylan in here. No? All right, cool. Well, I encourage folks to take a look at it. It's a pretty big change for you know, from what we've been doing, but I think it makes sense. So cool. Moving along, the next item is issue 649. Should we have a lightweight mechanism to spin off ad hoc CPC working groups? I think we kind of have this sort of figured out, right? I mean, we were talking about some sort of issue template, but also using CPC meetings as working meetings as well.
Yeah, do we think that we normally have? I've observed most meetings go like 40 to 50 minutes, though some of them end a bit early. Have you, do we think that is sufficient for spinning off new groups, or the idea is to test it?
It's a good question. Sometimes we do have full meetings, especially if we, have something new that somebody's proposing and we sort of dive into it.
I think the idea was to test it out. Like try and time box the first part so that we have, if we have something on the agenda, time boxes so that we do, and see how it goes.
That makes sense. Yeah. It seems like a good thing to try so that there doesn't have to be doodles. And
I think doodles was exactly the thing that we brought up, that like those are painful to try and find some other time, right?
Why don't they just, I don't understand why they can't just grab your availability and like make some options. Yeah, okay. Yeah.
Well,
yeah, that makes sense.
I work at IBM and our calendaring system is terrible. So there's, I have no hope for that ever happening, at least for me. Yeah, so I think trying it in the meetings is good. I do think that it maybe whether it's an issue template or some other like guidance might be good for folks who are just like, I'd like to help, spin off this this conversation, but I don't know. I'm a little intimidated by the steps that need to happen, and just having something clear might be good as well for those times that we do want to have a dedicated conversation. So, all right, well, we'll see. We'll try this out, and if anybody wants to take a stab at any other angles on this, please get involved in the issue and share your thoughts. Cool. I will continue on. Actually, where am I? Add growth plan templates. This is pull request 647. This has a number of approvals and reviews already. Well, this has been open for 21 days too. Okay, so I think from 2 weeks ago, a meeting, a CPC meeting, we should move this to the project status repo and add process in the README, which includes projects define their desired status themselves and projects ask for CPC approval of the roadmap. So I think there's maybe some work to be done here, but otherwise the bulk of it is there. If anybody wants to take a look and comment, otherwise get involved, please do so. Anybody got anything else on that?
I think Timmy's asking a good question about this, which is in the chat, which is about the growth plan for emeritus projects that want to move to at large. It's and to Timmy's point, that's probably pretty uncommon. That's probably true, but theoretically, our framework would allow for that. And so, do we want something to handle that case too?
It's a good question.
I kind of thought projects went to, so this is like projects have gone to emeritus, but then actually want to become more active.
Right. I mean, it's theoretically possible that a project that a maintainer group has decided is, they're done, they're ready to kind of move on. They feel what they can do for the project is no more, and they want to deprecate that. We do kind of imagine a path for another person from the community to come along and say, oh, actually, I've got a new vision for this project, and to revitalize it in some way. Not likely to happen for certainly our current emeritus projects, but something that could, again, theoretically occur.
Yeah, it's an interesting question. I don't know what we would draft for that sort of growth plan for that movement, but I think certainly being open to it makes sense. Shouldn't exclude it.
And maybe it's just a bridge we cross if we get there.
Yeah.
And yeah.
Yeah. It It'd probably be easier to just let an emeritus project go back to at large if it became active and not worry about it, unless they were specifically looking for support to make it happen.
Yeah. And in terms of the growth plans, I guess, when we figure out if they're going to be independent from the stage, that would be a natural then, in that any project could have a growth plan.
Yeah, makes sense. All right, cool. Thank you. The next item in the agenda is add examples of successful applications. Toby's got this started with AMP. I think, Robin, you were gonna maybe get another one or two and add it.
Yeah, I realized we had 5 examples, only 2 were published. So we'll get the other 3. I'll just get the maintainer's permission. We'll make those public and put them all in the same format, easy to find. We'll link them from the web and GitHub, if that makes sense.
If you had ones that you were ready to go with, we could add 1 or 2 more to this.
Yeah. Fastify is the other public one. Electron, AGAV, and NVM, I believe, are not. So, but they're all different random places. So,
okay. Well, if we want to pull 1 more in or 2 more in, we can go from there and then iterate on the rest. But whatever you're able to do sounds good to me. Cool. Thank you. So next up is issue 632, provide implementation guidance for DCO CLA. This has been around since September 1st. And I think we lean on Brian for moving forward on this one. I'm not sure if Brian's on here today. He is not. So we'll leave this one aside unless anybody has anything to add. Cool. Next is issue 592. This is the develop annual review process for projects. I think this is sort of an overarching issue at this point now, if I'm not mistaken.
Yeah, I think last time, I just remember Toby was asking if we should do something in parallel with this, and I think most people were comfortable with saying let's look at the moving forward on the growth plans, and then if somebody has time and wants to sort of run ahead with the overall review process, that would be good. But everybody seemed comfortable with us focusing on that, on the getting the growth plans in place and pushing that piece forward to start with.
Okay.
In the last discussion, anyway.
Yeah. All right, so we'll leave this one for now, as is. Great. Michael landed the next item, the governance changes for collaboration network.
Yeah, I just forgot to close this issue, so sorry.
Cool. Yeah, no worries. Great. And then the last item, I don't know if somebody moved these around or if it just worked out that way, but the last item is to simplify the proposal process. This is issue 635. This is the issue we're going to spend some time on. Miles, had a couple of suggestions here. I was looking at it earlier today too, and I think Sendel clarified some of the verbiage, which makes sense to me. So if we want to, we can dig into this process and probably I could imagine having a PR out of it and move along.
Sounds good.
Cool. How do we want to do this? Does anybody want to open up the staging process MD and capture things as we discuss them and PR them at the end?
I like that. It feels like it could get us to, +1 to that.
Okay. Nobody.
I'm happy to open it up if.
All right.
Unless somebody else wants to do it.
Either way, it's fine with me. You have it handy, Michael?
I do. Let me share my screen here. Share screen.
So I think the first thing. Oh, go ahead, Michael.
No, go ahead. I was just going to say, can I find the right page? But
staging process is the MD file. Yeah, you got it. Oh, cool. Nice, right in the editor. I think one of the things that Miles was saying is that stage 0 and stage 1 are confusing. And perhaps just changing the names of these would be would clarify it. When I was looking at it earlier, I mean, combining what Miles was saying and the text here, I think of it as stage 0 as, I think the term Miles used was incubating proposal, like basically you're working on this. And I think that it may pull some of the language from the draft proposal text. But I guess what I was taking, what Miles and Sendel were saying is stage 0 is like incubating proposal. This is being worked on. You know, it could start with just an MD file to kind of, you know, kick off the work on it, but still it's kind of stays in this incubating proposal stage. Stage 1 would be essentially in CPC review. You know, we're looking at it, commenting on it, and the end of that stage would be CPC approval. And then, if necessary, stage 2 would be in board review. And then stage 3, I don't even know if it should be a stage, but it's just like complete.
Right. Now, we've had like part of the I don't know what the right word, but challenge I think in the past is that each of the stages required a new PR. And that doesn't like, you know, when you said, well, we could have a in board review stage, yes, but having to create a new PR and move it doesn't seem like that's useful.
Okay.
I agree with that. I feel like we can simplify, one way we could simplify the process is through using labels or something as opposed to the PRs.
I was thinking about that too. Yeah. I that idea sounds appealing to me, but I don't know in terms of like, I mean, I guess the only real, I guess I don't see really any reason to kind of move it. You just have to create a PR. It's incubating, then it's in CPC review, and then it's in board review. I mean, this is all, I think, could be managed in one PR.
Yeah, I think it came from like the TC39 process where it's expected to be quite a long process and with quite a lot of discussion.
Yeah.
And so if you're going to have disagreement and there is some value to being able to land something earlier, which is, you know, clearly we haven't agreed yet, but we're actually capturing and landing stuff that we have. I'm not so sure that really applies to most of the proposals that come through nowadays.
Yeah.
Yeah, Michael is right. Oh, I was just gonna say Michael was right that we definitely borrowed this from TC39 staging through the bootstrapping kind of period and initial phase there, mostly because we wanted to make sure that everybody had a chance to weigh in and, you know, and just sort of like norm a bit. And I think we've really done that in our process. And so we can make it lighter weight. That's my 2 cents.
Yeah, that makes sense. And Miles just joined as well. Miles, we're talking about whether we need to even use more than one PR, and if we could instead perhaps use labels as, you know, incubating proposal in CPC review, and then like, I don't know if we would need like a CPC approved label necessarily, but in board review if that was necessary as well, and just keep it in one PR.
I think that there's a lot of value in allowing for multiple PRs in iteration. PRs can become stale over time, especially if proposals need to touch multiple parts. So I think that like at least one of the things from the staging process that we have right now that I like, but not necessarily the implementation, but just the idea is that like things that we're working on or ideas that we have can land, can be there, can be reviewed, can be copy edited, can have suggestions put against it. I'd be concerned about like the kind of problem similar to what we can see in like in software development, where if you keep really, really long running feature branches, they can become stale or just harder to maintain. Like in this, like looking at the staging process that we have right now, like I personally think we should just get rid of stage 0 altogether, because the difference between stage 0 and stage 1 has been like a big confusion in general. And that basically a draft, like us accepting a draft proposal as stage 1 basically just means we're landing something we're working on and it's not finished. I think, could someone open up the original issue where we proposed an alternative staging system, or is this based on it?
It's in the chat, Michael, if you want to click on it. It's issue 635. Oh, are you talking about the initial one or this year?
Yeah. So it's like, we talked about streamlining, and I think if you scroll down, we maybe iterated a little bit.
Yeah, Sendal's comment there.
Oh yeah, so it's like incubating proposal, waiting CPC approval, waiting board approval, proposal accepted. So really, there would just be like incubated and accepted as the two categories. And then CPC approval versus board approval could be like different phases of acceptance that are needed. So I would imagine like you could open a PR to incubating proposals to add, you know, like a suggested proposal, which doesn't even necessarily require anything more than us just saying, okay, we're okay with this moving forward. Like no one has major objections to the idea of the proposal. It goes in incubating. And then like when you're ready for approval, you open a PR moving it to approved. And then that's where we apply the labels and get the appropriate approval to move the proposal forward. And the CPC could be used to determine whether or not like board approval is needed, for example.
Yeah, so at most it would take 2 PRs, one to land as basically incubating and then one to go for approval.
Yeah, basically.
I do agree with your point that it's good to be able to land something which is not accepted.
Especially like some of the proposals in the past has required like creating multiple artifacts, for example. So being able, like, so Sarah, for example, I think it's safe to call you the champion of JavaScript Landia right now. But it's like, I see there's a lot of value in like landing the proposal that we have up till now, and then continuing to land like resources and assets as we want to like build consensus around them. And then kind of like when it's ready to like stamp the whole thing, you can kind of bring that whole thing forward. And I think that like one question would be, does it get moved to a like quote unquote accepted place? Or is it kind of like, do we have like a draft folder and then like we put the resources to where they're supposed to live when it's accepted? I think that's getting a little bike sheddy. But I do think that like being able to land things while they're either like in draft or incubating or however we want to frame it is like important for like faster iteration and you know, cycling on the work.
It seems like there's like a, yeah, I agree with, yeah, +1 to all of that. I think it seems like instead of there seems to be, if I were to outline the stages, it would be like number 1, suggestion. Like, does this, like, person has an idea, suggests it, and then I don't know if that's different than the landing the proposal, or if that needs to be outlined as different. And then like there's the time that people are iterating on it, and then there's like CPC approval and then board approval, which I think is kind of what we're saying, right? Is that there's a part where everyone's iterating, there's a part where the CPC says thumbs up but is still iterating, and then there's a part that's ready for the board. Does that sound right?
Mm-hmm.
I think, but I could be wrong. When we originally put this together, it was definitely a waterfall, whereas like approved by the CPC, then approved by the board. And a lot of that came from the way in which historically we've done like charter changes, in ways in which I've seen that be successful versus not successful. And I think there are some people on the call right now who might have memories of some of the charter changes from the Node project just taking substantially longer than they needed to, because if we didn't have the language exactly the way that it needed to be with approval from everyone on the project side before it went to the board, you couldn't really get the proper like legal review and board sign off if we're still like moving
Correct.
bits around. So
You'd be correct in people remembering that.
I didn't see you on the call, Tierney. I didn't mean to call you out so directly.
No, it's fine.
But so I think like setting it up as a waterfall was definitely to avoid some of those like deadlock situations. I think in actuality though, since a lot of these proposals haven't generally, but sometimes they do, but haven't generally required like charter changes or bylaw changes, treating that as a waterfall in most cases is not even necessarily needed, since it's more of a board FYI than a board approval. And so like, I almost feel like the approval phase, I like it almost more as like a product launch with different stakeholders. So it's like, we need to get different stakeholder sign off, and we may not go to get the board stakeholder sign off until we have the stakeholder sign off from the CPC. But I see that as like a single sign off phase with multiple partners, as opposed to like a waterfall, because I think that those separate stages of the waterfall, which like essentially was the difference between stage 2 and stage 3 before, just created unnecessary friction and caused things to be slower and honestly confusing.
I have a
Yeah,
thought.
that's what I was. To go ahead.
Well, first of all, Sarah, I'm glad to see you like pair programming. I wonder about, and this may kind of lower the hurdle to proposing something, but what if we started with the initial proposal is an issue, and you kind of go through what you are proposing in an issue, and then you have a PR for working through that proposal. You land that PR in the kind of proposals directory, and then when you are going for approval, you move all the artifacts into place, and that's what the CPC approves and the board, if necessary, approves, because you're seeing the changes actually in effect in the repository.
So yes, and Joe, if one thing that we could explore with this as well, and I've been looking into a lot, is GitHub Discussions as a new feature that's available on GitHub. We can get it enabled for this repo if it's not already enabled for the org. But one of the things that's nice with discussions is that you can have like one discussion with many threads. So whereas in an issue, you're kind of like a single thread, discussions can have multiple threads, which I think is slightly better for like a brainstorming phase. So like in theory, a workflow could look like bring an idea to a discussion so we can kind of come up with like what a solution might look like, propose the solution via an issue, which then in turn becomes a pull request, which has like the actual things. My only concern here would be like, that workflow can be like really nice and defined for folks who are external, who maybe don't have as much experience with like the bureaucracy and things that are going on here. Historically, most of the proposals coming in though tend to be internal proposals, and mostly from people who have like a fairly decent familiarity with how our process works. So I'd be concerned that we'd be introducing like lots of steps that we don't necessarily need to follow in order to build consensus as a group. And I think starting as an issue versus a pull request, especially for like a proposal, could be a step back, because there's no way for people to really comment in line and offer suggested language changes. It would almost potentially be better to say, let's make like a HackMD or a Google Doc to scratch this out in before we open the PR. But like jumping between platforms is not necessarily great either. So I'm inclined to sticking with just what we have right now, which is like opening a pull request following a template. But I'm not necessarily married to it. That's just kind of my gut.
Sure, no, and I think that makes sense too. And so, but still, the idea would be the initial pull request is like, I'm proposing this as an idea, and people can iterate on that to whatever extent. And then you would open up another pull request to do more work on it. Like, I just want to kind of have clarity on, I guess, those first two steps before it's like accepted and then reviewed by the CPC and potentially the board.
Well, I think like, oh, please go for it, Michael.
I was going to say, I thought my understanding was like you'd be able to land something as a draft, so you could continue to land things in stage whatever, stage 1 maybe, and then once it was ready for final approval, you would make a PR to move it to stage 2, which would be the final acceptance.
And I think we may even benefit from removing the word stage from this
Right.
altogether, and maybe just change it into like proposal process, and it would just be like draft proposal, like creating a draft proposal and getting a proposal accepted. And so like the steps are really like fill out the template, open a PR that puts it into the drafts in its own folder, work on it until you feel like it's ready to be approved, and then open a PR to like get the approval.
So when you're ready to be approved, you merge that PR and then you open a new PR for approvals?
No, I mean, you're merging PRs into the draft folder consistently through the whole process.
I'm thinking we might want to make that optional. So like, I agree with your earlier comment that it is valuable to be able to land stuff that's not the final approved thing.
Mm-hmm.
But if you think you've got a proposal that's pretty much ready for final approval, why not be able to just submit it at that?
Has that happened before? Like, have people come in with something that's ready to go without iterating on it?
But it's like iterating, there's generally some iteration, but at the end of that iteration, you need to land it without getting approval. It's more like, is it something where you wanted to land it in advance of actually getting consensus that it's something we're going to do?
So
sorry, go ahead, Miles. Well, actually, just to confirm, sorry, what you're saying is the actual like landing, people need to be able to fail the landing if it's something that we don't want to actually do, but they need to have like a stage where it's more of like a suggestion.
It's like, hey, not everybody agrees we need to do this, but we want to actually get something into the repo so that, it's more visible. Then multiple people can do PRs, and, so if it's something that's going to take 6 months to get consensus on, it actually does make sense to get, interim versions landed in the repo.
So I guess the thing that I would say, and I think I like the word incubating better than draft for this, and I would not say that it would necessarily be optional, is thinking about this as iterative. It is not necessarily a good idea for someone to go through, for example, and come up with a whole draft proposal, as well as draft like everything that they need to implement the proposal. Maybe there are some small things changes that can happen. Most of those can probably just come as like PRs against the repo. But generally, when we're thinking about proposals, they might require bylaw changes, they might require charter changes, they might require budget, they probably require some degree of documentation. So I think like the thought process here at least is like, and maybe we need to pare down the template, but it's like, putting together a template and starting a proposal as incubating should be something that you can do in like 15 minutes. Like, I have an idea and I want to kick it off and I want to get it going. That should be really quick. And then we can do quick iterations on it until it's at the point where it's ready and baked. I think, and I could be mistaken if folks can think of examples, but I can't really think of too many examples that wouldn't require like substantially more effort to have a proposal in a place where it's like ready to be accepted right away.
So I'm just trying to get clarity on when we land a PR and what happens at each stage so that it's clear for someone coming in. Like, does somebody suggest something in a PR and we say, cool, this is something we should move forward on. They land that PR, they open up a new PR to a different folder that is saying we're going to work on this, and then once that work is done, then that's like accepted, and then you land that PR, and then there's a new PR for approvals that moves everything into the appropriate places.
I think that, and perhaps I've done myself a disservice, that sounds far more complicated than what I'm trying to suggest. I'm saying that like we work on proposals. When you make a new proposal, you open a PR to like have that initial form that outlines the proposal and might have other documents as well. We land that. Between that and the proposal getting accepted, you do as many PRs as you want, which could be anywhere from 0 to 100 to get that proposal in a place where it's ready to be accepted. And when you're ready to get the sign-offs, you do one more PR to move those assets to where they need to be. And this is one of the things from like stage 3 of the current process. And I think like a good example would be like our governance document. I think is a great example of how this worked is like there's governance.md, something getting, the governance getting accepted by us involved like putting that governance.md in the root directory. So like, it's not necessarily we're moving it between 50 or 100 different directories. It's like the incubating place is where it's like kind of hermetically sealed and being held until it's ready to go. And then when you're going to accept it, let's say the acceptance includes like a change to the bylaws and a change to the charter and a change to some other things. Like that PR will have all those changes in it and they just land where they need to be for the thing to be implemented. So like that incubating place is really just so that we can have faster iteration cycles.
That's why I was thinking maybe optional, because like if you've got something simple that's already agreed and somebody's willing to write up everything, you can iterate.
But does something like that even need to go? Does something like that even need to go to through the proposal process at all?
Yep.
I guess is more my thought process. Like if you've got something small that directly changes something, even like the charter, and you could build consensus around it in a PR, like you don't need a proposal for it. Like I think the proposals were, at least when we were originally talking about it, was much more focused around like larger initiatives, things that require budget, things that require us to commit to doing things that we're not currently doing. Like we really shouldn't need to use this process for a good portion of the work that we do. And we haven't been, and that's good. Like I would say right now, aside from the work that's being done on the sponsorship program, I don't know what other super active work necessarily requires like this level of process.
It sounds like we're describing, oh, sorry, what, did I cut you off?
No, go for it.
It sounds like we're describing three, I just want to confirm what I'm hearing. It sounds like what we're describing is 3 phases. The first one being incubating, where people are iterating, possibly in a GitHub discussion. I really like that. I haven't used that yet. I like testing those new features. The second phase is an optional, well, maybe an optional phase, maybe not an optional phase of ready for stakeholder approval, whoever the stakeholder approval is. And the third one is published. It doesn't sound like there's,
I think,
yeah,
to
is that
me,
what we're saying?
Oh, sorry, I have bad internet.
Yeah, that was it.
My internet's a little goofy here. So sorry if I cut you off there, Sarah. To me, it seems like there are 2 phases in essence. There's the draft or incubating, and then ready for like official review, which is when you move things into place. And then kind of approved is like, well, sort of, you know, as long as you get past 2, approved is like kind of, yeah, that's where you are. Which I like. And then, so if I understand correctly too, in the incubating phase, you can do multiple PRs. You can keep iterating. You can kind of like snapshot, like, okay, cool, we agree on this. Here are the questions that remain. I'm going to capture those questions in a new PR, you know. And I think, Sarah, you did a little bit of this in the recent one, sponsorship, which we were trying to follow some staging program, but I think that makes sense. You can do as many PRs as you want and just snapshot it.
Yeah, that sounds right. Does that sound, yeah, does that sound like what we're describing, Miles?
Yeah, I guess,
yeah.
I guess like the only thing that we're that we're trying to figure out right now is like if a proposal can go directly to getting accepted and not require this incubating phase at all. And my gut on that is being like anything that's small enough that it doesn't require an incubating phase probably doesn't require the proposal process. And I think.
Sorry, go ahead, Mas.
No, please.
I was gonna say, I also think to Sarah's point, have we seen something that goes from being proposed to instantly accepted yet? I don't think we have. I could be wrong.
It's not the instant.
It.
It's not an instant exception because it's still a PR and people still comment and it still gets tweaked, right?
Yeah, and I guess I like doing that tweaking is where you do it in draft, and then once we're ready, like we can kind of do that without having to do the acceptance, which I think is like fair. I don't know. I don't see that as a huge problem. Like it is, yes, it is potentially an additional step that would be rapid, but in the majority of cases, it seems like it would be pretty non-issue-y, if that makes sense.
I mean, we could also change this whole thing to be a framework that people can use optionally. At the end of the day, like things aren't going to happen if we don't build consensus around them. So like this proposal process exists to create rails to make it easier for people to be successful. If people can be successful without relying on this process, I don't have a problem with that. Like they need to get the buy-in. So I think like maybe a separate framing that we could do here is maybe, you know, frame this as like a proposal process and make it as like a suggested best practice and use it as much as it's useful to you. If people can build consensus and make suggestions for changes in the repo that gets buy-in without following this process, I don't think we should be so adherent to it that we make it go through all these steps.
Makes sense to me.
I like that. It's maybe less intimidating for new people who have ideas and want to offer something up.
Yeah, and it becomes a nice funnel as well, especially if we turn on discussions. So like we can have a discussion about an idea that someone has and then offer to help them through this proposal process to like make their idea a thing.
Yep.
But yeah.
The one caveat I'll raise right now on discussions is that they don't have labels yet. So we can't like agenda them up. So that might be just something we want to be aware of.
Yeah, they have categories, but not labels, yeah.
I might actually say that that's a strength. And the reason is that one benefit of our existing system is that it does sort of help organize when and where specific decisions have been made. And so I think as I listen in, one thing that I want to make sure we don't lose is the clarity that can be driven from understanding the process and what state things are in, because outside that, you know, it can be hard to know, like, oh, what's really the status of this particular idea, and you know, that's one thing just that I'm thinking about.
Yeah, like having that list of here's the ones at a particular stage is handy for sure.
Yeah.
But I guess with that in mind, depending would be like, we would have a list of all the proposals that are in progress that would be easy to look at. And then in theory, but you can correct me if I'm wrong, a proposal that doesn't need to go through this process because it can be like instantly accepted in like 1 week, you would never really need to look at where its progress is because it would just land. And if it were to take longer than 1 week, we'd probably tell them to just go through this process. But Jory, to make sure I'm maybe not like skating over the point, was it the various stages of progress of a proposal that you think we're losing right now potentially?
Yeah, so when I think about like to your point, a small small thing that we can reasonably get quick consensus on and execute in a short period of time. Let's like super duper speed that up. Let's make that faster. But when I think about a larger proposal, like the supporter program proposal by one example, that's one that really, were it not for Sarah's excellent championing of this particular topic, there's quite a few different miscellaneous floating parts. And so it's really on her as the champion to make sure that the status is really well communicated, and in conjunction with the process, I think that's fairly clear. And so, when I think about tools we can use and process changes we could make, I think things that make it more clear for people to say, oh yeah, cool, it's this, that's just great. That's all.
Yeah, I think the one, thanks, Jory. I think the one risk we run with changing to this model, I know we're almost at time, is there's no clear done. And I think if I were new, and even when I think I don't think that was solved with the other system, to be clear, or the stages rather. But I think as part of this, if we can also add defining what done looks like, I think that would be helpful.
Yeah,
I think
separate project.
I think maybe something, Sarah and Jory, that we could do there and explore when we have a little bit more time is then thinking a little bit about like doing production services. It's alpha, then it's beta, then it's generally available. Or like for releases, you do an alpha beta release candidate. Maybe there's a way that like we have incubating proposals, but we have like different labels that we can apply to an incubating proposal depending on where it's at. I guess maybe that does or doesn't work for things that are just in a folder versus a pull request. So I need to think on this a little bit more. But maybe it would be helpful to like have kind of like a checklist of things. Actually, a checklist could be a very good way to do this, where like every proposal at the top has like a checklist of things that you need to do before you can go get approved. And so like following which of those checks are done could help and that could do a combination of like Jory for what you were asking for, of being able to see like how far along something is, and Sarah for what you were asking for, which is having like a clearer definition of done. Like I might be able to accomplish a little bit of both of those. And we're at time. Thank you for letting me talk so much.
So it sounds like we're in consensus to go down to 2 PRs effectively. Like one PR to, one or more PRs when you're incubating, and then 1 PR when you want to finally get it, basically get it approved and put it into practice.
Yes, that's my understanding.
And maybe something that we could do also here, just kind of thinking through it, depending, Joe, is maybe for every proposal, we could have a consistently open PR that's just like that checklist with all the stakeholders signing off on it or something like that. Maybe we can think through a way of like creatively using a PR or an issue to track the progress. And then maybe project boards or something like that. Or actually a project board with categories could do it too. Okay, I'm just vomiting from my mouth, so I'll stop.
Well, I think this was helpful. I think we made progress. Maybe we can have a PR open and iterate in there. And we can try to take some time next week as well to try and close this up.
Yeah, I think next time maybe if we could, because I don't think we're quite at the point where we've edited it to what we think it should be to create the PR, but maybe we can do that next time, having pretty much, I think, figured out what we want to do.
Yeah, I might take a stab at a PR, but we'll see.
Sounds good.
I have so much to do, but I might. Cool. All right. Well, that's helpful. I appreciate everybody joining, and we'll talk more about this next week. And thanks everybody. Cheers.